taking what I need from an experience and kind of when I get some phenomenal insight, really sitting with that and focusing on kind of the integrative process has been the biggest change. Back to your original question about like what's been going on. We're still, the nonprofit that I spend time with is still doing work and getting guys and gals an opportunity to have that peak experience. But on a personal front, I've really, really settled into integration and kind of finding my own spiritual practices on a daily basis. And that has all come from that catalytic experience with both 5-MeO and Ibogaine.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm trying to just sit with it more and really soak it in as much as I possibly can.
I mean, what else is there to do? But in a lot of ways, it's always like we're trying to find the next thing to do. And a lot of it is being. It's like
Totally.
it's taking the curriculum in a sense. It's like going to school as opposed to like, well, today I'm taking a vacation or I'm
Right. I have a good
uh,
a good friend of mine actually framed it as, um, these peak experiences with plant medicine, psychedelic medicine are it's like renting uh it's like renting a house, right? Instead of owning the house. So you get to rent an awakening for a short window of time and then you have to give it back. Unless you decide that you want to actually go all in and start making that mortgage payment every single month with the hope that in 30 years you'll own it. The bank won't own it anymore. You'll actually own it. And I love that. I love that analogy because uh, I am a huge proponent, obviously, of the healing that can be opened up within us through these medicines. But I'm an even bigger fan, and I'm like a novice now of applying spiritual practice every single day into my life to really own my awakening and find that connection, with God, oneness, love, whatever you want to call it. But it's putting the work in. It's simple, not easy, right?
well, the more you quote unquote do that work, I think the less it's work. It's more like what else is there to do? I mean, in some ways, you're always just looking to deepen your experience because there's always a sensation in the background of almost like this, like a perceived separation.
Hmm.
And so in a sense, you're wanting to ameliorate that because that's a natural feeling. It's like, I just want to be closer to the thing I know I am. How do
Yeah.
I do that? Is it through this? Can I have a beer, or should I, maybe it's about going on a run, or maybe it's going to be about, everything we do in a sense
Yeah.
is chasing that dream of truth, whether we're conscious of it or not. Do you find like with the guys and gals you're working with, through the vets and in this work, beyond that peak experience, like how are they navigating like after it, or what kind of successes or challenges are you facing through that work?
Yeah, like anyone that is kind of going through hardship, and kind of has this aha moment. There's always the kind of honeymoon period where everything is great, right? It's easy. You're on easy street
You get the
because
tattoo that's like of the fungi coming up, yeah.
right, right, yeah. Your
Ayahuasca tattoo.
life is good. Like you love everybody. You're calling all your friends that you had a falling out with and making amends.
Yeah.
But 3 months later, 6 months later, things get tough, right? If you don't put yourself back in a positive setting, you're not surrounding yourself with positive people, you're not, doing the daily discipline practices. People struggle, and I think the biggest help and the thing that has been kind of the glue that holds people together is that sense of community and connection that has been built through these shared experiences. So it's like the medicine just keeps getting served up when you can connect with people that have had that experience and are on this path together to support each other. So I've seen kind of community and connection, loving connection, be one of the most impactful ways that guys and gals have been able to stay on that path and continue to progress.
But is there shame there, like inside the culture? Like, is there kind of like a shell that has to be cracked for people to
Mm.
really accept that or open up to it, or is that like a
Yeah.
challenge in itself?
Yeah, I mean, we coming from I mean, I'll speak to the SEAL community, absolutely, right? Vulnerability is not something that, is the first attribute that you think of when you think of, like, a hardened Navy SEAL. You think of people that are, callous and cold and capable, but vulnerability isn't the top thing that would pop to mind. But you know what I've witnessed is I've witnessed vulnerability manifesting within our community because of the way that people that have been able to touch it are willing to share and be vulnerable, right? Like vulnerability begets vulnerability, and I experienced it. I mean, I was brought into this kind of path and given the opportunity to have one of these peak experiences because friends of mine that I would have never guessed would be vulnerable showed vulnerability and shared their own personal struggles and their own healing that they found through this experience. And for me, it kind of cleared me hot, right? It opened the pathway for me to feel comfortable going down this path because somebody that I love and respect and care about from the community is willing to open up and share that story with me. And I all I can do, and I will tell you, I'll lead with this. I have I've always known who Ram Dass was. Uh, I had friends of mine, frankly, there's actually a good friend of mine from the SEAL teams that mentioned him and kind of the wonderful things that he brought to the world several years ago. And I kind of just like cataloged it and said, okay, yeah, that sounds good. I know I've heard that, great things came from everything he brought to the table, but I have fully immersed. I mean, I feel like I've been
You went
it's
down the Ram Dass rabbit hole?
I've been given a gift. I mean, I think I've read and listened to everything that he has put out, or if I haven't, I'm listening to it now. And the thing that really stuck for me, and I share this with a lot of friends, is all I can do for you is work on myself, and all you can do for me is work on yourself, right? Be living examples of how we would like other people to be. Don't force it upon them because, I
Yeah.
I went down that path with friends of mine where I became the evangelical, spiritual awakening guy,
Nobody likes that guy.
no,
Yeah.
no one does, right? They feel, they go on the defensive, right? Like, "What's wrong with me? Why are you saying that I have a problem? Am I broken? How are what right do you have to point the finger, at me?" Whereas it really was coming from a place of love, and until I'm embodying that and showing them, "Hey, this is," I mean, living a life where I'm showing them how loving and connected and happy I am, they see that, and I've had friends see that and say, "Hey, Nick, I'd like to explore, that thing, with that group that helped you out so much." And, they come back after the retreat and they're like, "I can't believe I didn't listen to the stuff that you were putting
Well,
out."
it's and in some ways, that's the only way. I mean, Terence McKenna used to say that, like, the best endorsement you can give to the medicines as therapeutic tools is just, like, live your life in such an exemplary way that people are curious, like, what's working for you. It's
Totally.
not about anything, like, you proselytize or say. And at the same time, like, as you were saying, like, telling stories and telling your own personal story and one of, like, vulnerability of your own hardships and what you overcome and how, not only is that therapeutic to tell, but it sounds like it's a kind of invitation for others to say, like, well, I mean, that's sounds like that's actually was your initial doorway,
Mm.
is and it's almost like a baton we pass or like an invitation letter to people, and then it encourages them to see themselves in your own story,
Oh,
right?
totally. I mean, I was just at an event this past weekend, for our company, and it was an event that is, it was all alphas, right? It was a big fitness event, Soren X Summer Strong. So it's like all the strength and conditioning coaches in college football and a lot of professional teams, and everybody's big and strong and and very dominant. And I found myself and I found not only me, but I've heard other people at that event sharing messages of love and connection and community. And it was so it was heartwarming for me because that's where I'm living right now. So I was like lit up and smiling. And I actually shared, I shared personal stories and gave out a lot of hugs to guys that, a few years ago I would have never imagined, this a strength and conditioning coach for a college sports program, would walk up to me and give me a hug after, he heard me speak about connection and the importance of community. So I see it spreading, and it spreads because people are willing to be vulnerable and share that, kind of that personal story and exemplify it in the way that they live their life. So it's definitely out there. You just got to be willing to put yourself out there a little bit.
Do y'all have any plans to do any of this work more publicly in places like Oregon as psilocybin comes online, or is it because you're prioritizing ibogaine or 5-MeO that you have any domestic plans?
Yeah, I mean, so ibogaine and 5-MeO. I mean, it's going to take some time. You have MDM. Yeah, I mean, ketamine's already medically legal. MDMA is next on the docket that will become legal, and then psilocybin on the heels of that. Um, but to answer your question, yeah, there's a big focus on political advocacy within vets. I mean, I'd say political advocacy is one of the primary focuses of the organization. So there was actually a SEAL, former SEAL, that was I think he was one of the juggernauts in Oregon to get that legislation passed. So it's funny because he was the guy that no one in the world would guess would be involved in any of this work or be vulnerable or spreading a message of love and acceptance. And he turned out to be kind of one of the primary movers for Oregon
Wow.
getting to that point. So uh, a lot of political advocacy. I know we as vets as an organization is a co-sponsor of the California decrim legislation that's in action, still waiting to take hold. There's been work in Texas. You think of Texas as a pretty conservative state, but this stuff is bridging political boundaries like I've never seen. And Texas is now, I think they have a legislation that has been passed where Texas money will be funding VA studies with MDMA, ketamine, and psilocybin for veterans. And the list goes on and on. I mean, there's a lot of kind of grassroots effort to get this stuff out there because vets is focused on the special operations community and combat veterans, but that is a very small segment of who will benefit from this. I mean, you and I both know that this work is beneficial to all of humanity, and the biggest thing that we can do as an organization and as a community of former special operations is to be a voice and a bridge, to try to kind of uh, close the divide between the right and the left and get us unified on this, right? I mean, this is apolitical. This is about helping humanity have an opportunity to open themselves up to healing and find that that peace and happiness that I feel like we're being gifted through this work.
There's not much. I mean, there's not much that crosses any political divide. I mean, the only thing happening right now that there's a little bit of consensus on is about Ukraine.
Hmm.
But you would think that when it comes to just cognitive liberty,
Yeah.
that the right would be into that,
Right.
and the left would probably want to traditionally regulate it, but they'd be into the mental health aspect. So maybe they have different reasons that they're on board with it, or no, we want the tax dollars, or
Yeah.
that kind of drug policy that isn't working. But it does seem to be more about mental health.
Yeah.
And it also could be a symptom of the fact that we're really spiraling as a people who
Mhm.
need, there's a lot of problems with mental health. I think there's a pretty fair recognition of that. So it's just kind of like, man, what do we do? What tools do we have beyond what we've been using thus far? And I hope that we can lean into that, because I suppose with one of the advantages with psychedelic therapy is that it can be quite strong and sometimes have a large impact faster, perhaps. And I only think that's relevant only because time is a bit of the essence as far
Yeah.
as creating changes on a personal level, or just finding ways to um, deal with collapse on a personal level. Like, it's
Yeah.
like that isn't destructive to
Well,
yourself or others around you.
we live in a world, I mean, let's face it, like, we have become more distracted as a people as, time has marched forward, and, people are looking for kind of that immediate impact, and not saying that psychedelic therapy is the magic pill, because I know that I mean, as we were just discussing, it's all about how you incorporate those lessons on a daily basis after it, but it is powerful. It's catalytic, to the degree that it's been able to open up the calloused hearts of a bunch of hardcore special operations veterans, and open them up to the idea of kind of inner divinity and healing and love, all these buzzwords that aren't buzzwords once you've had the experience, right? It's a sense of knowing.
How are special ops people? Are they coming to see or deal with the full picture of their previous actions, or in a sense, like, I didn't take a full picture because you almost can't in a way. Like, how can you fully understand some of the things you're asked to do, or being a part of a machine that maybe now that you have a more holistic picture on like the universe itself, you're like, I don't think I'd do that now. Um, or is that not true?
It's what I think is, I mean, from my observation, what I've seen is that, we are all shaped. I think we are mostly shaped by our early childhood, right? Those formidable years in our life. Let's call it. I mean, again, people will probably correct me on this, but I'd say between the age of, from birth to 5 years old,
Yeah.
our brain is this malleable piece of clay, and the things that we experience in that early childhood period, kind of create who we are going to be and how we are going to carry on in this world. And I think the number one thing that my friends address is kind of early childhood impactful experiences, both positive and negative, through kind of ibogaine and 5-meo through this retreat. And I'd say more often than not, it isn't even experiences in combat that come up. It's guys reconciling with the fact that they were abused physically, and mentally, maybe as
Mm,
kids, which led them to compartmentalize effectively at a young age, right? As a
mm,
4-year-old or a 5-year-old, if they were abused, sexually, physically, emotionally, they learned how to lock that stuff down and be very good at dealing with stress and performing and carrying on life with a tremendous amount of stress and baggage.
mm,
And I think ultimately that's what led them down the path to special operations and to being part of that community, because they were looking for fraternity, brotherhood, community, connection, and they were very capable of dealing with the stressors that come along with a combat, zone and going into combat. Because I mean, I can tell you from my personal experience, when I took ibogaine, I assumed that I was going to, relive combat, things that happened to me, things that I saw, and I witnessed none of that. And ibogaine is like, you don't get to dictate what ibogaine is going to show you. Like, you don't get to dictate what any of these medicines are going to open up in you. Uh, but the things that I touched on were like the loving relationships in my life, those that I lost, fractured relationships between me and my mom, my brother, losses that I've had, my younger brother, my dad, and really identifying those areas in my life that led me down this path to where I am. I was struggling. I was cold, I was apathetic, and I was very closed off from people.
traumas for sure. But speaking to like early childhood stuff, to me, it goes back to thinking about like just the power of supporting people to be better parents. So like early childhood education, childcare. I mean, this is super liberal ideas, but it's kind of true in a sense. Like if you really think about how do we support young children and young families and parents, how that the trickle down effect generationally
Mhm.
that can have on society is profound. But we
Oh,
don't usually think about like, well, if you pay for that stuff now, how that might help us in 20, 30, 40 years.
I'm a firm believer in intergenerational trauma, right? And trauma carried down, through a
Absolutely.
lineage. I mean, it's
And
maybe
we're
I
focusing on the symptoms in a way. Like we have to treat
totally.
because you do want to treat the symptoms, but it's like a lot of these causes go back to like, well, when we're starting life out, if people, it's hard for people who are everything's a struggle and there's no resources, there's no health care, and the
Mhm.
food's crap, and you can't get a good job, and then someone goes to jail and this and that, and like, what do you what are we expecting? How's that going to pan out? Or the people who are abused and there's no resources to try to work through and work with that trauma in their own life
Yeah.
to integrate it into a new shape. It just
Yeah.
gets passed on in a sense or transmutated into some other negative behavior.
Right, and people, I mean, hey, I probably fell into this category of like, I don't that's crazy, it sounds woo-woo, mystical, magical, but it's real, you feel that. I mean, like the abuse that your grandparents suffered was passed on to your parents, and it formed them into the person they became, and maybe that's the reason they abused one of their children. And ultimately, if you don't break that cycle and you don't get in the way of that to enact change, why would it ever change? We're conditioned by our environment, and specifically we are conditioned by the people that brought us into this world and that we spend all of our time with during those formidable years. So yeah, I totally agree. I mean that's one of one of the biggest, blessings having gone through this is really opening my eyes up to being fully focused and engaged with my children and giving them everything I have, knowing that it's going to determine whether or not they carry on a positive kind of
Yeah.
lineage or a negative one.